start having questions brewing up, because we love question and answer. Sorry, the arrow on the bottom right.
Well, in some ways, I sometimes feel I've done a few meetings in the last few months trying to represent the fly fishing industry. First of all, thanks for including us. I think one of the things that I should probably start with is to recognize that my fellow outfitters and guides are sometimes the lost element in a lot of these efforts. That we're often, I think, a fairly independent group, maybe a little bit like some ag producers I know, and sometimes we have a tendency to want to fix our problems by ourselves and not work with other interest groups, and I'd like to say that I hope that era is over in the outfitting industry, that we're going to move forward. So I guess I'd I just put together a few slides for you here. One, just to give you some pretty pictures to look at while I'm yakking at you. But of course, the thing that I've got in this particular slide is what we're all hoping to provide for our clients, and that is beautiful Montana scenery and ideal flows and temperatures and lots of willing fish that want to eat our clients' flies and provide that sort of experience. One of the things that strikes me over the last few years, I guess one of the things I should say from the very beginning is that there aren't a lot of fishing guides that have as many gray hairs as I do. So one of the things I think that has limited our ability to participate in the process is that most of the guides, if not outfitters, that are working in the field tend to be fairly young people. One of the things I think that we've done a poor job in the outfitting industry is to actually provide some sort of continuity from generation to generation. So I think sometimes younger guides are trying to reinvent the wheel. One of the things I would say is that it's not always bad to be the old guy. One of the things I think I've found is finally found some perspective. And I guess what I would start with is one of the things I think we're realizing that this ain't your grandfather's fly fishing environment anymore. So one of the things that we're starting to face is recognize, again, the whole point that this group is together is to recognize that the climate change is here, that we can't continue to stick our heads in the sand and pretend it's not happening. Some of the ways that's happening is we're actually being forced to consider these things when we start seeing low flows and warmer water temps resulting in hoot owl restrictions. So finally some actual direct influences on our daily lives. Of course, for those of us in the Yellowstone drainage, the PKD outbreak in 2016 was really the thing that was the wet towel across our faces to make us realize that business as usual wasn't business as usual anymore. So again, the experience that we're hoping to show our clients are not lots of dead whitefish on the Yellowstone River, but actually that pretty scenery I was showing you before. So again, for a lot of us, I think the PKD closure was sort of the final straw that really taught us that our entire world can come grinding to a halt if we don't start to recognize some of the problems that we're dealing with. So just to run through a few of those challenges and changes, certainly some of the things that you're all familiar with, the things that we're dealing with on the outfitting side is that we're seeing earlier runoffs, lower peak runoff, higher water temperatures typically by mid to late season. Those are all things I think that you're all very familiar with. So a few of the other challenges that I think that I should mention that we see. One is sharing resources with other water users. This is about the most general bullet point that I could put on this slide. One, obviously, we are sharing water supplies, so in terms of water quantities with agriculture and municipal water and all the rest. One thing that has changed in our lives dramatically, which might not be immediately aware, is to recognize the number of recreational water users that are out there that don't have any intention of catching a fish. So one of the things that's changed a great deal for us is to recognize that there's just a lot more pressure out there, and that pressure is coming in lots of different ways. Finally, the impacts coming from invasive or nuisance species are probably one of the biggest issues for us in moving forward. I'm also serving on the board of the Invasive Species Action Network. As I tell people, I was in New Zealand for the first time in 2011, and the first time I saw a stream that was, as we call it, a nuisance bloom of Didymo. Nuisance bloom doesn't really describe what a stream that has a heavy infection of Didymo looks like. And I found religion, and I came back and I said, okay, I finally get it. I see how important the invasive and nuisance species things are. So those are some of the ways, some of the things that we're seeing. So just a few of the things that I wanted to offer to you, that some of the adaptations that we're starting to come up with. I would say there are some members of my community that are trying to portray the fishing situation in Montana as exactly what it was 20 or 30 years ago. I've been in Livingston for 30 years, and I can tell you, things are really different. I can think back when I was managing a fly shop in town and running a guide service, when people from around the country and around the world called me and asked me, when should I come to Montana? I can think back what I told them 25 years ago, and the speech would be very different now. So certainly one of the things that we're seeing in our world is changes in scheduling. So certainly one of the things that, again, what we think of as the fishing season isn't what it was 20 years ago. One of the changes we're seeing in the commercial end of fishing is that I would say probably when I first started booking guides in the state, August was probably the most popular month to come. It was really dependable water conditions. I'll tell you, last year, I didn't book any dates in August till about the 15th of June. And I'm not alone. Now, a lot of outfitters, again, are going to try to book every single day of the season because we're trying to make a living at this. But one of the things I recognize is that we simply have to be more adaptable and look at what the realities are. And I polled actually a large number of outfitters that are members of FOAM, our professional organization, over the last couple of weeks. And the one universal change that was, we don't book a lot of August anymore. And a lot of that is fill-in business. The other things I think that we see as we go through that daily changes, one of the things, for example, that if we're dealing with warm water temperatures, I'd have to say that food owl restrictions, actual closures late in the afternoon through the evening, one of the things that forced a lot of outfitters to do is recognize if we want to give our clients full-day trips, we have to get up pretty early in the morning. And one of the things I've seen is that when people actually did that, got on the water at 5 or 6 in the morning, they discovered the fishing was pretty darn good. And now a lot of them do it as a regular thing, if they can convince clients to get up that early. Certainly we also see seasonal changes. The bookings in September and October have risen dramatically. A lot of outfitters are now trying to make use of the fact, as we were just listening to, the fact that we often have warmer, earlier conditions where we're not dealing with snow but dealing with rain, so that lots of outfitters around the state are now trying to push people into March and April, which sometimes works out well and sometimes the weather comes to bite us on the rear end. But we certainly see that, and matter of fact, a lot of outfitters, looking at one of the commercial responses, lots of outfitters now offer substantial discounts for clients that come in April and May, because we know we can have relatively dependable water conditions and at the same time try to bring people in a time when there's less pressure. The other thing I think that we're seeing is with variability in seasons. So again, kind of moving from drought to flood and drought to flood, back and forth. One of the things that means is that we've also had the realization we need to communicate better with clients. Modern technology has changed a lot. When I first started booking guides 30 years ago, it was all snail mail and dumb phones. And that booking window was a really long process. People now expect to be able to get on their phone and be able to tap a couple of buttons and book a guide immediately. So one of the things we've seen is that clients now often wait much longer to commit to dates. They come once in June because somebody said it was really good last year, and then they get flooded out, and they come in August and they're dealing with food owl restrictions or closures. They start to get a lot smarter about that kind of stuff, and for us it's been a practical problem that it's much harder to plan our seasons because people don't want to commit until much later. The other thing that means is that with that technology, we also need to recognize that we need to monitor conditions much more closely so that, again, our clients are. I know they've probably looked at snowpack numbers since I have, most of all the clients on my client list. So we need to keep up with that so we can communicate those too. Another thing that we're seeing, I think overall, which is very interesting to me, again, as we see changes in temperature regimes and flow regimes, and especially increasing pressure, one of the things that a lot of outfitters are doing is simply trying to diversify the experience. So moving to different business models, moving more to private waters, moving more to overnight camping trips rather than simple day floats. Different species. Hopefully we won't all be fishing for smallmouth bass in the Yellowstone drainage in the next few years. But one of the things that we're finding in some of those hot summer days when conditions get tough, sure, a lot of guides around Bozeman that try to talk their clients into going carp fishing on the upper Missouri. And again, I see that as a response to the sorts of conditions that we're dealing with. So a good way sometimes to get you away from all the crowds. The last thing I want to really spend a minute talking about is one thing that I've been working on in the last couple of years. I don't know where he disappeared. I was going to try to make sure everybody gave him a little nod too. I've been working with another outfitter, Sean Blaine from Bozeman, for the last couple of years on something that we'd actually, in fact, let me get you to, the last item that I've got on here is the Geyser Conservation Training Program. Sean Blaine and I, and actually more recently, Whitney Murray. Just want to give you an extra special thank you. Whitney's a conservation person with the Arthur Blank Family Foundation. And I'd like to thank Wendy Weaver for putting Whitney in touch with us. But quite simply, the idea behind the Geyser conservation effort is to give us this sort of resource training to make us the stewards of the resource that we often profess to be. So it's a matter of actually giving us that kind of training, hopefully a much better interaction with agency folks like you, involving us. One, I think a couple of real goals. One, to make sure that we are outdoor educators. Every person that sits down in our boat, we have an opportunity to try to educate. I would like to point some fingers at my cadre of guides and say there's a lot of misinformation that gets spouted out of guide boats. And one of the things I'd really like to see happen with this program is for us to have the information to be able to inform the public about the issues that we're dealing with. The other thing that we really do hope to make out of this is, with lots of goals certainly in terms of cooperating with various stakeholders, but one of the other things that we'll be talking to folks like you about is hopefully you can be using us for data collection in the field, so we can be doing some citizen science, not just the guides themselves, but also involving our clients in those efforts as well. So I guess I would conclude that hopefully we'll still be catching Yellowstone cutthroats in the Yellowstone drainage for maybe even for another generation. So thank you very much.